Thanks to Gabino for being here. It's his third time in Oxford.
Yeah.
It's great.
I know where to drink.
I told him, he knows the 3 spots to go now.
That's about
Square
it.
Books, City Grocers. Maybe I'll send you to the record store.
The one across from?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there.
Oh, you've been there. Okay. You've been to the main places. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming back. Thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. Gabino's new book is House of Bone and Rain. It's great. It came out, I guess, 2.5 weeks ago, something like that. From Mulholland, and it is a book that's got a pretty straightforward revenge hook, and this is something I really love. I mean, there's that element to it, that kind of revenge narrative, but it's about so much more than that. The kind of copy on the book tells you that, and if I was to try to sum it up in a sentence, I would say something like, crew of friends seek vengeance after one of their mothers is murdered, just as Hurricane Maria is bearing down on Puerto Rico. That's kind of like a quick line about the main action of the book. But as I said, there's so much more going on here, kind of folklore, magic, rituals, Caribbean history, ghosts, class, colonialism, brokenness, just tons of stuff. And Gabino writes I'm going to use this word, hybrid, which I'm going to try not to talk about it in relationship to the book specifically, though it does have some implications in the book as well. But I think he writes this kind of great hybrid of crime and horror that I can't think of many people kind of operating in that territory. And this book's another example of that. So I just wanted to start out by asking you to talk a little bit about kind of the origins of this project, writing about Puerto Rico. This is your first, I think it's your first novel about Puerto Rico, right? Published. and yeah, just kind of talk about the origins of the project and everything.
Will do. Thanks, Square Books, for having us again. Glad it's not raining this time. But thanks to Bill for being here again. I brought an email. You send me to Oxford. I want Bill Boyle. They're like, we already asked. So you're on tab.
Nice.
Yeah. Before I talk about this thing, I'm a fan of literature. So I feel like the kid in front of the class. Every time that I do a book tour, I see old folks that I've met. We're both 22, but we met a while ago. And then I come to Oxford, and it's Bill, one of my favorite writers, guy that I've been looking up to since he started writing. When did you publish this with JDO?
2013, I think.
Yeah, when he was 16. Anyway, and then I come here, and there's Michael Farris-Smith and Ace Atkins in the house, so I feel like a kid who's looking at the professors trying to do a presentation, so bear with me. This book started in 1999. That was the year that I graduated high school, so I might have been lying about being 22. I had a friend, and his mom used to work security at a club. She checked IDs. That was all she did. There was a drive-by, and she took 2 bullets to the face. And she dropped dead immediately. So we got together, and we cried and cried. We hugged each other, and what are we gonna do? Well, it's clear. We've seen all the movies. We gotta go get revenge. And it never took off. There's levels of badassness. We were badass for where we were, and we were not in the same space as people who drive around shooting people in the face. I started thinking about, at the end of that summer, I started thinking about writing a story in which we had a different outcome, where we actually managed to do something. And I didn't want to write it back then because I didn't think I had the chops. I don't have the chops now. Now I don't care because I got to pay bills. Since 1999, it was a story that was brewing in there when when I moved away. I had been living in Austin for an entire year when I called my mom up one day and I said, Mom, you know what? I just realized I've been here for a year and I've had electricity and water for a year. This is paradise. I'm not moving back. And she laughed. And then she said, maybe one day you'll write about it. So I kind of put the idea in my head of bringing a hurricane into the story. And when Maria happened, it was like, this has to be that hurricane.
Yeah.
There's like 3,000 dead people. My parents went without power for almost 6 months. To this day, they've never had, since Maria, Monday through Sunday of power at the house. And that's like, what, 3 years now?
Well, of course, the crazy timing with Ernesto now,
Yeah.
which is kind of
On top of that.
reopening all
Yeah.
the.
It's a busted system. Our grid doesn't work and it hasn't been fixed. I was a very little kid for Hugo in 1989, and I remember just months of no water and no power. So I knew how to write that, and then it kind of coalesced, and the way that folks received The Devil Takes You Home, I was like, now's the time. I can tell that story. I have enough readers that are not going to be mad that I take them to a little island. They might pick it up anyway. So, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like, very personal book, and it's got that element of somebody writing about the place that they're from another place, or writing in exile.
What you do in New York?
Yeah. I mean, in a different way, but I mean,
Sort of.
yeah, sort of, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I guess that goes for anybody who's writing about the place they're from a different place. But the narrator of this book, or I shouldn't say that. The structure of this book's really interesting. That's something else I wanted to talk about because I was surprised by it. I think after reading the copy, and it's kind of framed as like this book about this group of friends, kind of Stand By Me-ish, and it is that. But the book isn't structured that way. I think when I opened the book and saw chapter 1, Gabe, character's name, that we're going to be in Gabe's perspective for this chapter, I expected, okay, we're going to bounce between all of these characters. And you don't do that. This book is really interesting in that it's whatever it is, 40-something chapters or something in that range. And largely it's first person from Gabe's perspective. And then there's a few other little dips in and out of some of the women surrounding these guys. Natalia, who's Gabe's girlfriend. Is it Altagracia? Altagracia, who is Bimbo, one of the other guys. Bimbo, his wife, his girlfriend, or kind of,
Legal.
Something.
Entanglement.
Entanglement.
Yeah.
And then there's one chapter that's, I think, Rebecca, and there's one chapter that's the hurricane, which is one of my favorite chapters in the book. But largely, it's like 90% or 85% Gabe's point of view. Can you talk a little bit about structuring it that way and deciding to tell this story really mostly from Gabe's perspective, but then bouncing into these other third-person perspectives here and there?
Yeah. Writing The Devil Takes You Home turned into a personal experience. I had maybe 30,000 words, and then the pandemic hit, and I lost my job, just like some of you lost your jobs. And I was desperate, and I was angry at our healthcare system, and that's when that book became very, very, very personal. With this one, it was personal from the beginning. So it's like, I'm not even going to start looking for fancy names for my characters. I want to tell you the story of how this happened. It's nonfiction up to a certain point, so it'll just be me, and I'll just call him Gabe, because it sounds better for the American market. People just botch my name, so smart. I'm a businessman, so I did that. And then I had this. I knew this characters were going to show up in the book. Gabe's girlfriend Natalia and Altagracia, which it was a hilarious thing because back then we had this thing on the island where there were certain, I'm not going to call them criminals, there were certain street entrepreneurs who convinced, in Puerto Rico, convinced Dominican folks, men and women, that for X amount of dollars, they could bring them to Puerto Rico, marry them with someone, work on the story, and then get their papers that way. It's all fake. It doesn't work that way. But when you have a racket going, you don't tell people that. And when I wrote about this, they were fact checking the book. They're like, that's not how it works. So I had to give them a class in underground economy so they would understand the racket. But in my head, I think we do, every writer I think does this. You have these little things that you do for yourself. So Easter eggs or references to other books or whatever. And in my case, it's such a dark book, and it took me to these very dark emotional areas that I had my running joke, which was, this is a book about how everything goes wrong because men don't listen to women. Because these two women are the smartest people in the book. And they're telling these guys what to do and what not to do. And of course, being men, they just ignore the women, push through, everything goes to hell. And then at one point I was like, we need to hear from the smart ones. It's another, there's a lot of testosterone running around and just fucking bashing people's heads in with power tools. So at some point you have to elevate things a little bit.
Yeah.
And the way to do that when you have 5 jackasses is to turn to the women. So that's how they ended up in the book.
Yes, I think it's a brilliant move because I think there would have been kind of not that the 4 main male characters are the same, but there could have been a sameness to seeing the story just from their perspectives, and switching into these other perspectives really switches things up in a really useful way, but also an interesting way from a narrative perspective because we're getting their stories as well.
Glad you thought so.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great. I mean, it really took me back at first because it's like a string of Gabe chapters to open the book, and I was like, this is weird that he's starting at each chapter with Gabe. Is it going to switch at some point? And then it did. And it was jarring in a very good way. And you talked a little bit ago about some of the violence in this book, and I think Gabino writes violence really well. And it's really, a word that comes to mind. Maybe it's an overused word, but I do think it's really visceral. It's very, just kind of full of sensory details, and you can imagine it, but it's also characters kind of thinking a lot about the violence that they are taking part of, or committing, or whatever. So I think in Devil Takes You Home has one of the great, most violent scenes I've ever read. And this book has, I don't know, without spoiling anything, several tongue removals. There's
People talk too much.
Yeah, there's some stuff. There's some really haunting, terrifying images in this book, which is, again, a way that Gabino really balances kind of crime and horror, because he'll slip into, what seems like a kind of crime scene, not a crime scene, but a scene from a crime novel will become a scene from a horror novel very, very quickly and effectively. So can you talk a little bit about writing violence and how you approach it, and what the purpose of it is for you?
Not only do I talk about it, I have a funny story for y'all. I write the book, I send it to my wonderful editor, Josh Kendall, who also edits Mr. Mike Ferris-Smith. After the whole thing's done, I get my letter. I'm going through my tweaks and changes and edits. And 3/4 into the book, we come upon a scene, and he exits out. He does that with you too, right? He sends you a manuscript. Like he's an old school guy. So I'm working through the physical copy, and he X'd out the whole scene. And there's no spoilers here. One of the characters finds someone who's responsible in a way for the situation. So he stabs him in the face passionately until the blade breaks. And so my editor says, my boy, you went too far. We're going to X this. And like I said, 3/4 of the book, I had taken 100% of his edits, comments, questions, everything. And I get to that scene, I go, no. Let me reply. He said, my dear Josh, in the previous book, we cut off the kid's toe with bolt cutters.
Yeah, that's a good scene.
Oh, this is between two consenting adults, so I'm going to keep it. To which he replied, haha, fair enough. So that's in the book. Because sometimes you have to show the thing. I explain to my students cozies as there's a murder, but you don't see it because the story's going to start after the murder happened. And then there are other books that are like, and then you heard a shot, and that's fantastic. But I've seen violence, and I believe in righteous violence, and I believe in the power of narratives about vengeance. And I want you to see the violence. Yeah. It's easy to talk about it. It's like, I grabbed a long branch and I cracked him over the skull. Did you? How did it sound like? Did he drop? Was there a lot of blood? It's like a car crash. We remember our accidents a certain way. In reality, it was like maybe 7 seconds. It was brutal, and you remember the sounds and everything. So violence is the same way. I was in a fight. They're not like in the movies. No one's like Jackie Chan, Jet Li. You get in a fight, it's 30 to 45 seconds. Someone gets decked out, or someone runs out of juice. So I want you to see it. I want you to understand that it has repercussions, that violence haunts you, and sometimes you want to do that violence because you know it's going to feel good, and then it feels good while you're doing it, and then it ends, and then you go, and now what? Like I did that. I'm not a better person right now. I don't feel happy in general. So I want you to look at it. Crime does that very well, and if you do it hard enough, people say you cross over into horror. Yeah. So I like doing that.
Yeah, I was wondering how working with Josh is in that regard, because mostly of it's crime fiction, literary fiction. But I think, I do think you kind of, in those moments, that your kind of horror background comes into play because you're intent on showing that stuff to us in a way that not just shock value, but it actually reminds me a lot of Sam Peckinpah or something like, that there's a bearing witness to it or something, right? And you have a lot of, as I said, characters kind of thinking about it, and that's really one of the many really interesting components of Gabino's writing. So one of the other things, since we're talking about horror a little bit, and talked about this kind of as, again, I don't really believe in spoilers, but I don't want to ruin the experience of the book for anybody, because this book does go to some really unique, interesting places. But I don't think I'm spoiling anything to say it could be in some ways classified as aquatic horror, which is a genre I really like and respond to. My daughter really likes, but she's not going to read this book. She does like aquatic horror, like
I know some starter.
Yeah, gateway stuff, shark stuff.
Peter Benchley.
So actually, that's what I was going to ask you. You do mention. I can't remember if it's in the actual book and the acknowledgments. I think it is. You mentioned a couple of writers, I think Stephen King and a couple other. I think it's the Gabe character early on, doesn't he? Talk about writers that he likes. So can you talk a little bit about kind of those kind of formative experiences with horror or with crime? There's a mention of Jim Thompson late in the book.
Yeah.
And actually, I just reread The Getaway last week, and for a thing I was writing, and people forget, because the movies, I think people think about the movies of The Getaway a lot as being kind of more straightforward crime movies. Jim Thompson gets weird. It's really weird, and the end of The Getaway in particular is really surreal and bizarre, and you've got this whole Kingdom of El Rey stuff, and reading your book right after rereading The Getaway, I felt that connection. So can you talk about some of those formative crime and horror experiences as a reader or viewer?
Yeah, surprised. I was not a good kid. I would get sent to the library a lot, and the lady at the library would always tell me, you don't break anything, don't burn it down. Walk around, grab something and read. And in one of those little adventures, I found Horacio Quiroga's Tales of Love, Madness, and Death. And that kind of changed my life. I was way too young to be reading that. But it was a different time. So by the time I was 12, I'd seen like Scarface, Friday the 13th, and The Exorcist. So I thought I was ready. And my dad has no education. He doesn't speak a word of English, but he's an avid reader. And his friends would read books. And from time to time, he'd see something that wasn't up his alley. He'd pass it down. He was like, "This seems like a little weird. You're reading that kind of stuff. You're reading or this is kind of like that. You can read it." And he gave me Richard Lehman's Endless Night, where the assassins keep a jar, like a mayonnaise jar of human fat in the van. So they ritualistically slather themselves in like human fat. I'm like 12, and I'm reading this, and I'm like, "Holy shit, can you do this?" And so, fast forward a couple of years, I kept reading anything that I could get my hands on. But Puerto Rico is 100 miles long by 35 miles wide. The first brick and mortar popular fiction store we had was Borders, and it opened in 1998, I think. All I could afford was the $3.99 paperbacks in the first table. When you opened the doors, you walked into the Borders, it was like $3.99 paperbacks. And that was Michael Connelly, Patricia Cornwell, Jim Thompson from time to time. And I started reading that, and I was like, this is the stuff that I like, except there's no monsters, no ghosts, there's no demonic possession. But when you look at a gun, especially if you see it pointed at you, it's scary as hell. So these two things go together. And when I started writing, it was like I wanted to do my own thing, but also, pay tribute to all of those folks. Starting with Stephen King, finishing with Jim Thompson. It was, they were formative. So I wanted to bring all of that together. And 4 books. I started with Zero Sayings, been doing it ever since.
Yeah, you can really feel it. I mean, maybe, I think that's one of the things I have always loved about Stephen King, that he was influenced as much by writers like Jim Thompson and crime writers of that generation as fantasy and horror writers. And Stephen King didn't he tweeted about, was it about this book or was it about something of yours, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a story. I was invited to contribute a story to an anthology celebrating like 50 years of The Stand.
That's right.
He read it and he liked it. I was like, "Stephen King liked my stuff. That's not a bad day."
Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah. I handled it well. 15-year-old me did not. It was not just as cool as you see it on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, "Hey, thanks, dude." No, it wasn't like that.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I'm glad you brought up The Exorcist too, because I was just talking to somebody yesterday about. I saw that movie when I was 8, and messed me up forever. Those formative experiences. So, and I think that Stephen King was a big one for me as a kid too. I mean, exposure to those books really kind of set me on a certain path. But also I read Jim Thompson for the first time when I was 12. So
it's for the children.
Yeah. And kind of building off talking about horror a little bit. One of my favorite lines in the book, it becomes kind of a refrain, is I think it's credited early on to Gabe's grandma. We're surrounded by ghosts, and all stories are ghost stories. And this is a line that comes back over and over and over in the book. And you really feel it. I mean, even as you have this kind of revenge narrative, this kind of crime novel thread, and then all these other elements about the place and the kind of other stuff that's happening surrounding the story, the stuff that I would say qualifies it as weird or horror or whatever. But this is really the kind of thesis of the book in a lot of ways. And so can you talk a little bit about what that means to you? Because I don't think it doesn't just mean it in like a horror sense. These are not ghosts like that. It's ghosts in a kind of more broader, more philosophical sense. Or something, right?
No, my grandma had a very tiny apartment, and you couldn't. There was only 2 bathrooms in her tiny apartment. One was in her bedroom. That was the one that everybody, including the visits, had to use, because the big, quote unquote, big bathroom was in the middle of the very short hallway, and that was the bathroom for the spirits. That's where she kept her milagritos and her offerings and her candles. Not a good idea to keep candles lit 24/7, especially if you're not in the house. That's what she did, and it was all spirits and ghosts. Like if you hear somebody die, you should pray for them, because then they might get angry at you, hang around, and punish you. If you're walking or you're driving and you go past the cemetery, you better start praying, because some lost soul might just hitch a ride with you. It was always ghosts. And then when she got really old and her mind started slipping, she was always talking to dead people or telling stories about folks that were no longer around. So it was like, one day we were talking and she kind of told me, everything kind of like begins and ends with death. So every story is a ghost story. Like, if it's not a ghost story now, in 50, 60 years, this conversation will be a ghost story. And I kind of wanted to use that to, make a sandwich out of all the stuff that they're doing in there that's very violent. And from time to time, Gabe steps back and realizes, every story is a ghost story.
Yeah, it's really, it's winds up being kind of this profound element of the book, I think, and the dead are very present throughout the book, and obviously the story is set during and after Hurricane Maria, so there's death surrounding these characters in other ways beyond just the crimes that they are committing in the name of vengeance, and that's a really interesting element. That's actually another thing I wanted to ask you now that I think about it. I mean, do you think about, I think as crime writer, horror writer, I know my brain goes to this place often, like using a natural disaster like that as a cover for committing crimes is such a good, plot device, or, that's not the right term, but you know what I mean. That, did that, when that happened, were you thinking, this is something to kind of mask what these characters are doing? And that's kind of a thread that carries through to the end of the book, where we're thinking, like, no one even notices what we're doing. No one even cares, because there's so much other death and destruction around us. So,
I remember having a conversation with my agent when I sent her The Devil Takes You Home. She used to be an editor at Love Double Day for like 10 years. So she sent me a very nice letter, and she said, here are some things that I don't want you to do, but I want you to try on for size mentally. And one of those included some cops at the end. And my response, which sounded a little bit rougher than I meant it to be, was, I don't write about cops. I'm sorry, they get enough attention.
They always want you to hate cops. I get that all the time. I don't write cops.
I don't like them. They don't like me. So we don't do that. We don't play together. When I realized that I wanted to have a hurricane, it immediately clicked. I was like, hey, every time I had a hurricane, the very same day, or it ended, or the next day, or whenever the government managed to communicate with the people, it was always the same story. Like, hey, it's the Caribbean. It's 6:30. It's going to be dark. Yeah. So by 7 p.m., everybody needs to be home. There's a curfew. We don't want you out. Here's the story. The cops don't go out. It's dark and it's scary, and they know that we don't pay attention. So it gave me the perfect reason, valid, factual. Hurricane comes, there's no power, the cops vanish. And these guys kind of needed that extra help. It's just 5 guys. There's a very powerful drug lord. They needed a lot of help, normal and supernatural. And the darkness that follows the storm is the perfect excuse to have them run around, and the cops are hiding. So I don't have to write about it.
No, it adds this whole other layer of tension to the story. It's really, and obviously allows you to talk about the place, I think, in a way that you probably wouldn't quite be able to exactly, if that wasn't the situation. I wanted to I've been lucky enough in my writing life to get blurbs from some heroes of mine. But there's not many writers. I think when I see a blurb on a book, I'm like, God, that's amazing. And Gabino's got a blurb from Mariana Enriquez, who is, I think, if you guys haven't read her, she's one of the most brilliant writers out there right now, Argentine writer. 2 story collections published in the U.S., The Dangers of Smoking in Bed and Things We Lost in the Fire, and 1 novel, Our Share of Night. All brilliant books. And
Our Share of Night counts like it's 3 novels.
Yeah, it's a big one. So she blurbed this book. I wanted to read it. It's real short. Not real short, but a couple sentences. House of Bone and Rain is one of the most intense, scary, and lovingly heartbroken modern novels you'll read. It's a story of violence and hauntings, of friendship and deadly winds in paradise, and it is unforgettable. So what did that feel like to get? I mean, she's got to be a writer that you really look up to. I mean, how did that feel getting that from her?
When A's walked in, I was saying, you pros didn't tell me about a lot of things. And he said, we'll talk later. Blurbs was one of those things. I had some books with you, small presses. You call up your friends, folks that you literally have on your cell phone, Jeremy Robert Johnson, folks like that. Hey, I need a blurb. All right, I don't even need to read it. and then for the Della Takes You Home, it was my first big book. So they're like, put a list together and we'll try that. And I went immediately to the folks that I had spent time with: Stephen Graham Jones, Chuck Wendig, Paul Tremblay, Dave Heskewamp, Waiting, Alma Katsu. Because I knew that a lot of people kind of already do. I knew a lot of people were going to say no. And basically 99% of them said yes. So then this time around, it was like, who's left? Like, I'm not going to ask Stephen King for a blurb or bother Ace. I'm not doing that. So let's look for giants that we didn't tackle the first time. And I remember writing about Mariana's book for the New York Times, and I was like, Mariana's fantastic. Joshua loves her to death as well. We talked a few times via email, and I was like, listen, I know you like it dark. I have a book coming up. It's shorter than yours. I can send you a PDF. And she's like, sure, but I only do blurbs if I like them, and I know that's not normal practice. Like, if folks say yes, they lie. They say no, I don't do that. And I was like, listen, I was in the supermarket for the Della Takes You Home. I was in the supermarket. I get a notification. I pull out my phone. It's done on a review. It's an email. And I open it up, and the first line says, I wanted you to know that your book sucked. And I grab my card. I push it to the side. Grab my face, and I'm like, all right, let's do this. So I open up my email again, and I read, I wanted you to know that your book sucked. Me in right away. So with Mariana, I didn't even ask. Like, I just sent it. I forgot about it. And if you follow her on social media, she's all over the world. So I was like, she's too busy. Let's keep on asking folks. And then she came through with that blurb. Yeah. I was like, this is gonna be right at the top. Thank you so much. And then I X that name out of the list so it gets ever shorter. So at some point, this is why, like 3 years ago, James Patterson said, this is my best book in ages. And then he blurbed himself. Yeah. That's one I ever wrote. That's one I ever wrote. James Patterson. Also, the balls to have your name twice on the cover.
You're right.
That's another level.
He blurbed it, but he didn't write it.
His name's got paid for it. Yeah. And has the name twice on the cover.
That's fine.
That's what it is.
I'm just going to ask another question or two, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So, Gabino, if you don't follow Gabino on social media, he's great. He's got a great presence there. One of the only reasons I ever enjoyed checking that stuff. But he's really good about, I think, writing advice and kind of talking about his own experience as a writer and making, being kind of transparent and making it feel accessible for people. I think, for me, when I was starting, and even still now, you know, I didn't know anything. I didn't know how this stuff worked. It wasn't really still until I started, you know, when I moved here, I started talking to Tommy and Ace, and they started helping me and explaining things to me that I started to understand stuff. And I think Gabino's kind of made it his mission in a lot of ways to be there for other people. And he's a great literary citizen. He's always talking about what he's reading and kind of boosting other people's work. But he's, you know, one of the things he does is he talks a lot about his own experience. I think I saw you tweet something the other day about, not being able to publish anything for several years, in the late 2000s into the early 2010s, and just kind of being persistent and keeping on. And yeah, I just wanted to bring that up and see if you could kind of talk about that a little bit, and what kind of advice you tend to throw out there to writers who are facing rejection and struggling.
Well, rejection, it's part of the game. So convince yourself that rejection is an invitation to submit elsewhere. If that doesn't work for you, spite, pure spite. Like on days when you're running out of energy, just remember then one person who told you you couldn't, and then you're like, you know what, I'm gonna prove you wrong. So today I'm only gonna do this. I don't have the energy, but I'm gonna do this to prove you wrong. The other thing is, I was all in for the writing. I was reading, I was writing, and that was fantastic. It's the nice part. It's the easy to do part. You meet fantastic folks. They produce fantastic books. It's a great life. And then you say, I want to do this for a living. And then everybody goes like, oh, that's cool. Good luck. How do you get an agent? Good luck. How do you go on tour? Good luck. And then you realize there's reading and writing, two best things that ever happened to me. They occupy this entire space. Over here is publishing. It has nothing to do with what you do on, when you're in your happy place. And then this is a business, and businesses are bad. Finances are bad, and capitalism is bad. But then those two come together. Like if you want to do this for a living, you have to be really good at this. And so it's like, all right, so-and-so published a book with a really good press. Year and a half later, I would meet those folks. It was like, so where are you cooking up next? They're like, I'm not cooking up anything. They dropped me. I didn't make my numbers. We offered a book to another press. They said they might buy it if I write under a pseudonym because they don't want to carry my failures from the past. And no one told me about that. So now I'm making my point about that. As soon as I learned something, I want to share it. I wanted to have the information out of it. Like it's not easy. There's a lot of stuff that people don't know about agents. It's like the reason why it takes so long is not necessarily because your book is bad. And a lot of folks read them and they're like, oh, I got 10 rejections and I thought it was trash. I'm like, I collected like 200 for my first novel, which by the way, it was trash. But I've learned since then that some folks take one novel that was rejected and they do something else with it, and it's a success. I'm always on tap for book people. They call me up. They're like, "Do you want to talk to Alex Michaelides, the guy who wrote the Silent Patient?" Biggest event we've done at Book People. Both floors were packed, and we're in the green room, and he tells me the first agent that signed him for the Silent Patient dropped him because he thought he couldn't sell it. And so that book sold almost 3 million copies. so sometimes you don't know, sometimes the agents don't know, sometimes you have to fight your editors, sometimes what your editor tells you is the thing that's going to make the decent book great. The more I learn, the more I want to share, the more I want to put that information out there so that people aren't as lost. Because being lost sucks, especially in publishing.
Definitely. And kind of building off of that, Gabino also writes. I mean, I don't know where he finds the time to do a lot of what he does. It's really impressive. And as I said, kind of a second ago, I think he's always one of the things that I always love about him. He's always a fan first too. He's always kind of talking about the stuff he loves. But he does write the horror column for the New York Times now too, and he reviews a lot of stuff for NPR. So he's a great reader, and great reviewer, and so it feels like a good idea to maybe end by talking just a little bit about some stuff you've read lately that's kind of blown you away, or that you've really been talking up.
There's an upcoming short story collection by Laird Barron. If you're not reading Laird Barron, solve that as soon as possible. I read on my flight from Arizona, I read Crypt of the Moon Spider by Nathan Ballinger, who wrote
He's great too, yeah.
And it's a 1923. I'm sending my wife off to a psychiatric hospital because she's talking too much. Except the psychiatric hospital is on the moon, built on top of a sacred cave where some folks used to worship a giant spider. So you don't know where the thing is going for 100 pages, but it's great. I read a thing called Wormwood by Leila Martinez, and it's a book about generational trauma, and these two women, a mother and daughter, living in a house where you have to sort of kind of slight jump out of bed, because if you put your feet down right next to the bed, there's a thing under it that pulls you under and kills you. And they keep all the lights on because there's things that hide in the shadow that can also eat you alive. And they just go about their business in that house, knowing those two things. And that blew me away. Anything by the end of the day gets right. Right now I'm reading I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. No one does it like Stephen Graham Jones. He invented his own genre, and then he said, now that I have a name, I'm going to reinvent slashers. And then he did that. I got the, was that Everyman's Library edition, the one that they did with Chester Himes.
Oh, yeah.
Genre, the intro. There's two writers that I'm always telling folks. Because Jim shows up in conversations.
Yeah, I love Chester.
Yeah, but Chester Himes, and when you mentioned crime writers that get weird, Charles Willeford.
Oh, yeah.
Like I remember reading that and laughing, and man, like how can you kill someone? One page make me laugh, and the next one. So yeah, anything you can grab by Charles Willeford is a good addition. Yeah, and the New York Times is a fantastic thing because we start every month with around 100 books, and then we have to whittle it down to 4, which is not it's not an easy task, but just seeing the variety, the diversity, collections, stuff in translation, novellas, novels, short story collections. It's just really good to see how healthy it is and how it's, it's like when I sold The Devil Takes You Home, the marketing team at Mall, we had a meeting. Fantastic women. They run that ship amazingly well. And I remember the conversation started with, "You write horror, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." So you're pretty proud of that. I'm like, "Sure I am." Like, "You like to fry your little freak flag?" So, "Yes, I do." "Yeah, we're not doing that." In this country, it's educated women who mostly buy books and read. You say horror, they don't go for it. You say very dark thriller, and they'll pick it up. Another thing I didn't know about publishing. So now I'm seeing books coming into that list, horror, and I'm like, this is a psychological thriller. There's nothing here that makes it pure horror. So I love how now other things are being categorized and pushed into horror because it's having a renaissance. It's having a moment. So it's a lot of fun.
That's great. Anybody have any questions for Gabino?
Comments, concerns, taco rest.
Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back again.
Thank you.
And, the book was really fun for me. I don't read a lot of books like this. I had to alter my reading habits. I usually read at night when I'm going to bed, but it was way too scary.
That's a blurb, ladies and gents.
And one of the things I really loved about it was I appreciate anything, no matter how serious and scary it is, that has a sense of humor. And 1 minute it would be Beavis and Butthead, join a gang, and the next minute it would be Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That was really great, but that's not my question. My question is really, Gabe, the major character. What I really loved was the play of reality and unreality. I mean, you have all the spiritual stuff and the folkloric stuff and magical stuff, but it's also just intensely realistic. And one of the things Gabe is constantly griping about is the colonialism that is Puerto Rico's burden or whatever. And I don't think people really know a lot about that. I had to go look it up, but it's a theme through the book, and you never really go into it. Of course, the hurricane helped make all that stuff apparent. But you want to talk a little bit about the history of Puerto Rico and why they're still in this weird limbo like that?
Yeah, sure. Also, I'm super stoked when people bring up the colonialism thing during the tour, because I learned, again, funny enough, from Stephen Graham Jones. He told me once, what we do is a cake, and then all the stuff on top of it is the genre stuff. In my case, like Stephen, werewolves and haunted houses and all that stuff. And then when people are attracted to that because it's shiny and it looks sugary, and for horror readers, tropes are like comfort food. For crime fiction too, we like that stuff. And then for me, living on the reservation, dating white women as a Native American man, all that stuff, I put that stuff on the inside. So they come for the cake because it's shiny and it looks nice, and they bite into it, and they're also getting the insides, which is my political views. I cannot imagine doing a tour telling folks, come on down, see me at Square Blues. We're going to talk about colonialism. It's not that exciting. It's not nice. So it's like, hey, we're going to go kill some people. There's monsters in it. Come hang out. Colonialism. And you put that in the cake. No, Puerto Rico, at some point, we don't know when, because they didn't have a lot of writing, but the Arahuaca Indians from Central America made their way to the Caribbean, and they settled in Puerto Rico many years ago. And then were decimated in 1898 when the Spaniards came in, and they said, where's the spices? Do it, you're lost. And then they stayed there and basically decimated the native population, the Taino population, which gave the Taino word for hurricane was huracán, which became huracán in Spanish, which became hurricane in English. So all of you use the sort of Taino word. There's a hurricane road that when I was coming in here, so that's awesome. And then in 1898, Americans showed up and they kicked a lot of ass, and they said, you Spaniards go home. We're going to keep this land. We're going to change a few things. We're going to let you keep others. You want to find someone who really understands law? Go to Puerto Rico and find a good lawyer. That good lawyer in Puerto Rico must understand everything that a lawyer in the U.S. understands, because federal law is the supreme law of the land, but we have civil law that we inherited from the Spaniards. So we work with both systems at once. I would say, including my parents, 50 to 60% of the population doesn't speak English. So it's kind of weird. I didn't speak a word of English until I was like 8 or 9. I didn't start until they started teaching me English in school. Didn't start writing in English until 2008 when I moved to the States. Wow. But it's what's a fancy word that folks like? Commonwealth. Commonwealth. It's a fantastic word. It's like, Bill and I are a commonwealth. We do shit together. Colonialism is like, I'm going to move into Bill's house, eat his food, and sleep in his bed, and he better not complain because I'm going to whack him. Puerto Ricans have been doing that since 1452. It's there, 1492. We just changed hands. And so to this day, I moved to Austin in 2008. It took me 3 trips to the fantastic Austin DMV on North Lamar, because the first 2 people there were like, Puerto Rico? No, that's a foreign country. You have to throw away your license and go through all the paperwork and take the test. And I was like, dude, I hand you this one. Trust me on this. I hand you this one. You give me a Texas license. Nope, can't do. 3 trips until one lady was like, "Oh, Puerto Rico? Yeah, no, I used to live in New York. I know how to do that." And then she did. So there's always something in my books that I don't want to put on the cover because a crime story about colonialism doesn't sound that exciting. But it is a story about 5 kids who. Here's a storm. What's going to happen? What kind of help are we going to get? Well, they're going to send Trump as he's going to throw paper towels at us. And then he's going to go back because no one's going to stay. Right? Colonialism is dirty like that. And the more you talk about it, the more you expose certain things. Why are you a colony? Well, because the U.S. has a lot of military bases. Why don't you become a state? Because there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of brown people who don't speak Spanish, and there's a lot of us, and they're kind of afraid that, Puerto Ricans are very liberal. You can go to Puerto Rico right now and get an abortion. No one's going to bat an eye. It's part of our civil law. You can get an abortion at any point in time. I think they're afraid of that, so it stays a colony. A colony means you don't get the exact same benefits. You're a second-class citizen. On the other hand, I have a blue passport, so anywhere that I want to go, I don't have to ask for permission. I have to grab my American passport and go, and everybody welcomes me. So it's like this pro and con thing constantly when you're living on the island, and they were all in there during a hurricane, getting no help. So not talking about it kind of felt, I know I'm going to get some hate mail, but I'm used to that by now. If it's not a trans character that pisses people off, it's the colonialism, so let them do that.
Other questions? Anybody else? Jimmy.
It's probably a quick question. I'm curious about these friends of yours that this book is based on. While you were writing this book or after it was published, have you been in touch with them? Did you talk to them about what happened then?
There's bits and pieces of a lot of my friends. One of the main characters in this book, I couldn't because he's in prison back home, so there wasn't a lot of talking. One of them, his dad, he died in a car accident, and the rest of them, I was very lucky that the summer that I was writing this, I got to go home. I found some cheap tickets, and I was like, "Mom, I'm coming home for a couple of days," and it was literally 10 days of hanging out with my friends, remembering really, really dumb things and very dangerous things that we did. I have a kid, he's 11 now, and sometimes I'm having a good time with him, and I'm like, I'm glad I'm alive right now. I've done a lot of things that I shouldn't have walked out of. So sitting with this folks, and it was like, hey, some of them are a little bit more mature now, and you can tell them, like, dude, that idea you had was really incredibly stupid. And then they look at you and they say, like, you went for it anyway. There was a lot of that, a lot of time on the beach, because Gabe loves the beach, just like I do. A lot of walking around old San Juan to talk about, it's been there for a very long time, and it's falling apart, and that's part of the beauty. So I wanted to touch base with as many people as possible. And to tell them also as well, hey, there's a book coming. You're going to have to get cool about a lot of stuff real quick because it's coming in August next year. So that was fun. But no complaints from them yet. Then again, half of them don't read in English, so that might be part of it.
All right. Go pick up House of Bone and Rain. Gabino's going to be signing books up here. Thank you, Square Books, Richard, Lisa, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you,
Again.
Gabino. Thanks for being here.